Mr. Kennedy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's first talk about this ballot access issue in Nevada. You submitted a new petition to the Nevada Secretary of State's office last week, despite filing a lawsuit a few days prior. This is because you learned that the 15,000 signatures you submitted months ago were invalidated because your running mate, Nicole Shanahan, was not listed on that initial petition. So what's your strategy now to get on Nevada's ballot for November?
Yeah, we checked with the Attorney General in January, and we got his assurance, written assurance from his office, that that we could collect signatures without the vice president on the ballot. We collected then the 15,000 signatures as the Attorney General had directed us. We handed those in March 5th, and shortly after that, in May, the Attorney General told us that he had made a mistake, and that we needed to list the vice president on our ballot petitions. So we are litigating. We filed suit immediately against the Attorney General's office, and at the same time, we were taking the precaution to do the ballot access drive all over again, and we're going to collect another 15,000 signatures. So we are out collecting signatures now, and one way or another, probably two ways, we'll be on the ballot legally by August.
Now, Mr. Kennedy, Dennis Kucinich, your campaign director from the onset, said that the DNC would just never let you in. Can you tell us about the party blocking you in the primaries, then the debates, and do you see what's going on in Nevada with our Democratic Secretary of State as a continued effort to block you from running?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a pattern where the DNC is attacking. We just filed, for example, we filed 137,000 signatures in New York State. We only required 46,000, and the DNC is actually calling up, sending texts. They've gotten the phone number for everybody who signed our ballot petition, and they're texting each one of them and then following up with phone calls to try to find some problem with how we collected those ballots. That's an example of one of many things. I'll tell you another even more egregious example is that a DNC connected balloting or petition firm lobbied very hard to get our business in New York, and we gave them the business. We gave them a contract to raise our signatures in New York, and they went out and raised, I think, about 49,000 signatures. We're only required to get 45,000. It turns out that they were committing fraud on virtually every one of those those signature petitions. They were doing easily discernible fraud that would be easily detectable later on. We didn't know what they were doing. We caught them. We have not used any of their signatures, so we had to pay for those signatures, but we threw them out because we didn't want to. And if we had relied solely on that firm, we would be off the ballot in New York. So there's a lot of dirty tricks going on, and but we're going to be on the ballot in every state. They said to us from the beginning that it would be impossible to pass. They said specifically that we would never be able to get the ballot sufficient signatures in Texas, in New York, in California, and Florida, and we're already on the ballot in all four of those states. And by mid-July, we'll be on the ballot everywhere.
Now let's talk about this debate. So you've made the criteria of meeting that 15% threshold in more than 3 of CNN's chosen polls, but now they're making the argument that the candidates' names must appear on enough state ballots to get that 270 electoral points. Now, Donald Trump, Biden, their names aren't on any ballots. Your name is on a number. What's going on with this? What's your strategy to get on the debate stage?
Well, under the FEC regulations, the the party or the network needs to use objective criteria when it decides who can get on the stage. And they need to use pre-existing criteria. What the Washington Post found out was that that CNN actually colluded with the Biden campaign to develop criteria that was specifically designed to keep me off the stage. The criteria that they're now using is that you have to be a presumptive nominee of a specific party. Today, the FEC announced that that is not a valid criteria. So if CNN goes ahead and stages this debate without me, it will be an illegal criminal campaign contribution to the Republican and Democratic parties. This is the same crime that Michael Cohen was sent to jail for, but actually it's a lot worse. So the people, CNN now is in a position where they're going to have to figure out whether they want to violate the law, the criminal law, commit a criminal act by excluding me from the stage, and we're going to wait and see what they do.
Now, your uncle, President JFK, was shot and killed in 1963. Your father, later assassinated in Los Angeles. You were there. Given who you are as a Kennedy, why do you think President Biden is denying you Secret Service protection?
That's a good question, and I can't really look into his mind and explain why he's made that decision. President Biden has the bust of my father behind him at the Oval Office. I'm quite certain he knows what happened to my father and what happened to my uncle. The Secret Service has made an assessment and found me to be at elevated risk. And I'm the first candidate who's requested Secret Service protection in United States history that has not gotten that protection. It's the president's discretion. In the past, presidents have provided Secret Service protection to people who have a tiny fraction of my polling support. So Shirley Chisholm, Pat Buchanan, Jesse Jackson, and many, many others all received early Secret Service protection, many of them over a year before the election. And yet we've made 6 requests to President Biden, and they've made a decision for one reason or another that they're not, without any explanation, that they're not going to provide it to me. I would say whatever their explanation, it indicates or it suggests the politicization of the federal enforcement agencies, including the Secret Service, that we're seeing across the landscapes today, which I think is very disturbing for American democracy.
Yeah, and speaking of that divisiveness, Trump, Biden, obviously divisive for America. You have said you want to focus on the things that we all have in common. You kind of tend to stay away from some of the social issues and other things because you want to talk about things like the economy, or like many of my friends and colleagues, we're in no position to buy a house right now, and it's a huge issue here in Northern Nevada with BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street buying up all of the houses. How are you going to begin to turn things around to rebuild the middle class?
I think you make the point right there that one of the most important things we need to do if we're going to rebuild the middle class in this country is to get every American who works hard, who plays by the rules, into a home. One of the central promises of the American dream when I was growing up was that if you worked hard and that you'd be able to afford a house, you'd be able to raise a family, you'd be able to take a summer vacation, you'd be able to put something aside for your retirement. Today, there's virtually nobody in your generation who believes that that promise applies to them. And as you point out, one of the reasons that housing is now, the price of the average home over the past 2 years has doubled. It's gone from about $200,000 to over $400,000. The interest rates have also doubled, so that house is now out of reach for almost anybody except for the big investment companies that you're talking about, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity, those companies own 89% of the S&P 500. They're now trying to buy the landscapes, the agricultural land in our country, and the residential housing, including all the single-family homes. One of the first things that I'll do as president is to offer legislation to make those kind of purchases of single-family homes by these big investment firms illegal. Last year, about 30% of the home purchases were by these big investment houses, and it puts the American people in the position of having to compete for the cost of money with the biggest companies on earth, and they can't do it. It's unfair. It's un-American. If you own a home, you care about your community, you care about your police, your firefighters, your education, you go to the PTA meetings, you care about your neighbors, but more importantly, you have equity. So you have an asset that you can borrow against. So if you want to pursue an entrepreneurial impulse, if you want to build a bowling alley or a yoga studio or a sporting goods store or a saloon, you can access money to do those things. And that widespread home ownership after World War II made the American middle class the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. And now that we're moving from an ownership society to a rental society. When that happens, we move from being citizens to being subjects. And it's a feudal model, it's a colonial model, and it's not going to be able to sustain American democracy or our country as the exemplary nation.
Now, final question here, and we want to thank you again for your time, Mr. Kennedy. You've said Biden and Trump cannot fix corporate capture in Washington, D.C. because they're entrenched in it. The CIA being controlled by the military-industrial complex, the NIH getting a lot of, and the FDA getting a lot of their funding from a big pharma. Now, you were one of the most prolific environmental lawyers in the entire country's history. How can you, as one person, begin to go into D.C. and begin to bring back trust in our institutions and begin to clear out this swamp, for lack of a better term?
I think that's a good question. I've litigated against almost all these agencies, against the Department of Agriculture, USDA, against DOT, Department of Transportation, against FDA, NIH, CDC. I've litigated probably as much as any other attorney against EPA. And when you litigate against these agencies, you get a PhD in corporate capture. And I know in many cases who the individuals in those agencies are, who are corrupt and who have spent their career amplifying this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. I understand the perverse incentives that put agency capture on steroids, the fact that FDA gets half of its budget from pharmaceutical companies, the fact that at NIH, individuals who work on regulating certain pharmaceutical products are allowed to collect royalties on those products. This is insane. And I understand how to unravel it. And, President Trump, I think, was sincerely wanted to drain the swamp, but he came in and he put John Bolton as head of the NSA, a swamp creature. He put Mike Pompeo as the head of the CIA. And he put Rex Tillerson, an oil executive in the State Department. He put Ryan Zinke, who's a coal and oil lobbyist, as head of the Interior Department. He put Scott Gottlieb as head of FDA. Scott Gottlieb was a business partner of Pfizer's. He then came to FDA, did a $100 billion favor for Pfizer, and then he left FDA to go back to Pfizer on its board of directors and collect his payoff. Oh, this is the swamp. These are all swamp creatures, and those are not the kind of people that I'm going to bring in to run these agencies. I'm going to be bringing people who are public-spirited, who are committed to the welfare of the American people. and who will not tolerate these agencies becoming sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate.
All right, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., we hope you'll join us again. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.